Why is everybody arguing and not thinking? Because people aren't tearing countries apart. The ideologies they stop questioning are. Welcome to the turn. Here's where this actually gets dangerous. Ideologies don't just divide people, they scale. They move from individuals to groups to institutions to entire countries. And once that happens, nobody's arguing anymore, they're recruiting. You can see it globally. Different flags, same playbook. Every conflict now comes pre-packaged with a moral script. Good side, bad side. Approved, outrage. And if you hesitate, not even disagree, just hesitate, you're immediately suspect. That's new. So we used to argue about policies. Now we argue about identities. Which is why wars don't feel tragic anymore. They feel justified. Because ideology doesn't ask if it's smart. It asks, does it prove we're right? And once being right matters more than being accurate, everything escalates. Countries stop negotiating. They start posturing. Leaders stop governing. They start performing. And regular people with jobs and families, suddenly have very firm opinions about conflicts they learned about 15 minutes ago. Everyone's an expert. Nobody's accountable. That's why the quiet joke is all of what it is. We've never had more information and less independent thought. We outsource thinking to ideologies, the same way we outsource food delivery, fast, convenient, nutritionally empty. And once a country convinces its people that doubt equals weakness, it doesn't need censorship. It has volunteers. That's how division hardens and how conflict spreads. That's how history repeats itself without ever changing the wording. No villains twirling mustaches, no grand conspiracies, just people who stopped questioning and started defending. So if the world feels more fragile right now, more angry, more ready to snap, it's not because people suddenly changed. It's because ideologies stopped being ideas and started being merch orders. And that's where I draw the line. Stick around, like, subscribe. You know what to do next. Learn what happens when reality questions sanity. This is your headline news dive.
News dive. I can't believe that just happened.
Damn, that was gnarly, bro. If you're just tuning in, this is The Turn and I'm Robert Peel. And the fastest way to lose the truth is to fight over the name instead of the facts. We've got a lot to cover today. Ice has taken over Minneapolis this week. Temperatures plunged to minus 32 degrees, even colder with the wind chill. Ice everywhere. Sidewalks, streets, driveways, parking lots. Temperatures dropped so low it drove local protesters inside, straight into a Sunday morning mass at a local neighborhood church, demanding an ice out. Nothing says community like everybody showing up to ensure safe passage. Meanwhile, Don Lemon is getting squeezed by the DOJ like a fruit over his Sunday service theater tour. If he gets lucky, they won't run him over the grates. He might come out zestfully clean. In other news, the Trump administration is making big moves to annex the Sudetenland. I'm just kidding. Greenland. But that's what the far left political ideologies are already pushing. Same word, same tone, same panic. All right, let's dive into it, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting overseas tonight, where somehow that's where all our domestic arguments eventually end up anyways. US-Iran tensions flare into a fever dream. The situation between Iran, the US, and Iran has officially crossed the line from geopolitical tension into late-night stage reality hallucination. The Trump administration is openly floating regime change. Iran responds by announcing public executions after previously promising they wouldn't. Then Iran leaders threatened to assassinate Donald Trump, not metaphorically, specifically. Finger, hand, very detailed. Meanwhile, the US sends fighter jets and an aircraft carrier to the Middle East because nothing says, let's cool this down, like floating airports full of missiles. And waiting in the wings, the son of the overthrown Shah lined up as the post-regime solution. From the hottest deserts to the frozen tundra, let's move on back home to Minneapolis. ICE conducts immigration raids. Protests erupt. Then they turn violent. Eventually, protesters move into a local church and disrupt Sunday Mass, which is where things get complicated. Because the DOJ responds fast, launching investigations into multiple felony civil violations. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If you're going to commit felonies, don't bring your cell phone and film it. And speaking of filming felonies, and because reality has a sense of humor. Oh, wait, wrong guy. Don Lemon. Again, Don Lemon. Anyways, oh, there he is. Don Lemon. Crap. I messed it up again, guys. I'm over it. Anyways, Don Lemon decided that Sunday morning would be a good time to take a walk and found himself magically interviewing not only the protesters in the church while they protested, then the pastor. Leaning in so close, he could probably smell it. Or Jesus in the afterlife, at least. And while that was unfolding, the situation containing the news dive and multiple subpoenas continued to be flying at a beat pace rate because introducing probes touching Tampon Tim and Mayor Jacob Free Fry, everyone's very serious now. Everyone's very shocked. Everyone's pretending this was never going to happen. And it ended up happening this way, which answers the age-old question. Why does a performance art have an off switch? I kind of asked myself that this morning. And let's leave Minneapolis and pivot north, maybe, to Iran and whatever's happening with all the, oh, there's Tim Waltz? All right. Way north. Because while everyone's arguing about borders down here, Donald Trump managed to light up the internet again by floating a Greenland deal. Not a policy memo, not a white paper, just a statement that landed like a snowball through a window. Greenland, an autonomous territory owned by Denmark, populated by people who already live there. Go ahead. Cue the outrage cycle. The headlines went straight to colonial, imperial, reckless, Nazi, unhinged fascist, taking over the Sudetenland. They didn't really say that. I made that up. But the hot takes followed right on schedule. Nobody slowed down long enough to ask the boring question. Why now? Because Greenland isn't just an ice shaped like an island. It's shipping lanes, It's rare earth minerals, it's military positioning, it's Arctic opening up whether anyone's comfortable with it or not. Same idea, different framing. Seems like a common theme here, doesn't it? Some people heard strategy, others heard history. Most people just heard the word and reacted to the tone, which is kind of the theme tonight. And with that, back to the rest of the world doing what it does best. And we are going to close up our headline news and skip us right to the weather. Because when you just thought winter skipped us, oh, you thought you were getting off easy this year, didn't you? Well, I've got news for you there, laddie. We've had an astronomical number of solar flares hit Earth, not to mention a Arctic plunge at the same time. Texans are shaking in their boots and probably not getting bitten by snakes because they're all frozen. And the last geomagnetic storm clocked in as an X4. The latest actual storm on Earth, well, we're not going to talk about that. But with more possibility on the way, scientists could warn this X4 storm could entirely engulf the way of life that we live in. Power grids, satellites, communications. Imagine a world without cell phones. No, really, try. No, you can't. Which explains why we end up with this. The end of this segment. And every story tonight sounded different. Different language, different labels, different teams. But the behavior was the same. We let forced ideologies tell us who we're supposed to be, what we're allowed to say, what we're required to hate. Somewhere along the way, belief turned into obedience, and the word patriot got diluted, reduced into merch, slogans, and loyalty tests, instead of responsibility, restraint, and principle. So here's the question. If everything is ideological and nothing is grounded, who exactly are we loyal to anymore? This now brings us to the next segment. Don't go anywhere. Like, subscribe. You're going to want to stick around for the truth. Well, at least from my perspective. What happens to the truth when ideologies meet narrative? One brain, many thoughts, so little time to explain, because the truth is boring. This is Rob's Rant. This week, living in an ideal nation. We keep asking why everything feels unstable, why conversations collapse, why every disagreement feels like heresy. Here's the uncomfortable answer. We're not living in a divided nation. We're living in an ideal nation. And I don't mean ideal as perfect. I mean ideology, because ideologies have quietly replaced principles. And when that happens, thinking stops. Let me say this clearly. Ideologies are idols, just in thought form. They don't exist in reality. They exist in the mind. And once you worship one, you stop questioning it. We've seen this before. Remember the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not have no false idols. The golden calf, the thunder, the whole sky cracking, mountain shaking warning. Yeah, same crap, different toilet. Back then, it was statute. Today, it's a belief system you're not allowed to challenge. Different shape, same sin. An ideology promises moral clarity without personal responsibility. It tells you who's good, who's evil, and who you're allowed to hate, all without asking you to think. That's not wisdom, that's outsourcing conscience. Principles require effort. They force you to weigh context. They make you uncomfortable. They demand restraint. Ideologies don't. They give you slogans instead of judgment, certainty instead of humility, belonging instead of truth. And once an ideology becomes sacred, disagreement becomes blasphemy. That's when debate turns into exile. That's when nuance gets labeled betrayal. That's when people stop listening and start converting or canceling. This is why everything feels theatrical, why outrage looks rehearsed, why everyone sounds like they're reading from the same script. You're not talking to people anymore. You're talking to belief systems defending themselves. And here's the quiet danger. Nobody wants to say out loud. When ideology becomes identity, you can't change your mind because changing your mind feels like erasing yourself. So people double down, even when they're wrong, especially when they're wrong. That's how nations don't fall apart overnight. They harden. They stop correcting course. They stop tolerating doubt. They stop trusting reason. A healthy society is built on shared principles, not shared idols. Principles can argue. Idols demand obedience. So, no, we're not suffering from a lack of information. We're suffering from worship of ideas, worship of certainty, worship of being right. And every time you feel that reflex, that urge to defend a belief before examining it, ask yourself one honest question. Am I thinking or am I bowing? Because history is very clear about what happens next, and it's never the idol that pays the price. Next, we take a deep turn on how definitions in our language have been changed, sometimes accidentally, but most of the time intentionally, to spin the narrative. Let's take a deep turn, not into the headlines, not into personalities, into words, because long enough before people throw punches, they throw definitions. This segment exists for one reason. The words lose meaning when violence gains permission. Tonight, we're looking at 4 words. Words that, with real historical weight, that are now being stretched, diluted, and weaponized until they mean whatever somebody needs them to mean in the moment. And that's not sloppy language, that's narrative engineering. Let's start with number 1, Nazi. What it meant: a real political movement, totalitarian control, state-run media, ethnic supremacy enforced by law, industrialized genocide camps, mass graves, a body count that doesn't need exaggeration. What it means now: someone with the wrong opinion, someone who voted differently, someone who asked the wrong question at the wrong time. When everyone is a Nazi, no one is, and the word becomes meaningless. So does the warning it was meant to carry. Next, fascist. What it meant: centralized authoritarian power. No individual rights above the state. One narrative, one truth, dissent crushed by government force. Ironically, the exact system people claim to be terrified of. What it means now: anyone enforcing a rule, anyone setting a boundary, anyone saying no. Parent, fascist. Teacher, fascist. Algorithm, super fascist. When a word means everything, it means nothing. Third, racist. This one matters because it carries more moral weight. What it meant: believing one race is superior to another, judging people by their skin color instead of character, judging people by who they are instead of what they do, judging people by what they do instead of who they are, judging people by whatever, it doesn't matter. Actual discrimination, clear, serious, specific. What it means now: disagreement, silence, asking for evidence, not adopting the newest approved language fast enough. When accusation replaces definition, conversation dies. And when conversation dies, people stop seeing how much each other, we are as human. And finally, number 4, Gestapo. The one that should never be used casually. What it meant. The secret state police. No warrants, no due process, no accountability, and no masks. They did this plain-faced, out in the open, because they didn't care who knew who they were. They didn't argue with citizens, they removed them. Arrests in the night, informants everywhere, speech treated as crime. What it means now. Any authority someone doesn't like, any rule that causes inconvenience, any enforcement that interrupts comfort. Moderator, Gestapo. School board, Gestapo. Traffic cop, definitely Gestapo. Because they make you stop, whatever. That comparison isn't bold. It's historically illiterate. Why is this dangerous? When words are weaponized, fear becomes justified. Hatred becomes moral. Violence becomes logical. Because once someone is labeled evil enough, anything done to them feels acceptable. History didn't begin with camps or firing squads. It began with language drift. Changing the definition, repeating it enough times, outrage does the rest. Now for the real deep turn. This isn't about defending bad people. It's about defending reality. Because when definitions collapse, truth becomes optional, and mobs always fill that vacuum. If a word can mean anyone, it protects no one. And when language becomes a blunt instrument, violence stops being shocking, it starts being predictable. So before you repeat a label, before you shout a word forged in blood and history, ask one question. Do I know what this word actually means, or am I just borrowing outrage? Because once you see how words are spun, you can't unsee it. And that's the deep turn. Now, finally, what everyone's been waiting for. When I share my hatred for stupid things that make no sense whatsoever and made you wonder why God created idiots. This is Wednesdays. What the bleep? 1 second. Do you ever run into those packages you just can't open without a force of nature? Not because you're weak, not because you're stupid, but because whoever designed the packaging clearly hates humans. All you want to do on Sunday is sit down, watch some sports, drink some beer, barbecue, and quietly remember why tomorrow is Monday and how much you hate your frickin' job. That's the dream. That's the American recovery plan. But no, now you're stuck putting together some crap from Amazon that took an hour just to unbox. An hour to open it. You're not even assembling it yet. You're still negotiating with cardboard and tape. You're peeling back tape like it's a bomb disposal. Cut here. No, wait, cut there. No, that's structural tape. No, that's emotional support tape. And then, just when you think you're in, you discover more packages inside the package, inside the box, inside your optimism. Now you're opening those just to get inside the Tonka-sized set of tools they gave you. A screwdriver, a wrench, both fit for a garden gnome. Not a man, not a woman, a mythical woodland creature with soft hands and no deadlines. And then the screws. Oh, the screws. An infinite amount of individually wrapped screws and bolts, each one sealed in plastic so tough, by the time you're done opening them all, you look like you just got into a fight with Edward Scissorhands. Hands shredded, confidence gone, beer warm. And here's the thing nobody talks about. The product, it's never worth it. You finally finish, sweaty, bleeding, spiritually exhausted. You stand back, and it's slightly crooked. A shelf that holds three things, and it slightly judges you. And you know, deep down, this thing is going to collapse the moment you put anything heavier than a remote control on it. That's when it hits you. This wasn't furniture. This was a test of patience, a test of masculinity, a test of how badly you really wanted to relax today. And once you start noticing it, you realize this isn't just Amazon. It's everything now. Crackers packaged like ancient artifacts. You open them perfectly, gently, respectfully, and they still shatter before they can even breathe. Tools, the kind where you move wrong, you don't lose patience, you lose a finger. One slip and suddenly you're bleeding in the garage asking yourself if Home Depot sells dignity by the gallon. Those new environmentally friendly micro brew 6-pack holders, great idea. Love the planet. But the grip strength required, not too eco-friendly. That's a man holding a beer with intent. You don't carry it, you commit to it. And God help if your hands were even slightly damp. Now it's a trust fall exercise with alcohol. And then the beer just tastes like a wet shoe anyways. And let's not forget chip bags. No matter how careful you are, no matter how slow you go, they always end up partially or completely on the floor. For the dogs. Because great things come out of crunchy bags. And because the universe decided you didn't deserve the first bite anyways. And somehow, the dogs always know. They're already there waiting. Like, oh, you open chips? Oh, we heard that ritual failed, my friend. So yeah, this isn't bad luck. It isn't design. And whoever is in charge of packaging now, they don't want convenience, they want participation. And if opening everyday objects now requires gloves, tools, patience, and a mind-emotional breakdown, then maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe the world just keeps getting harder to open. Emotionally. Maybe we should feed it a Snickers in the big giant Snickers hole we call a volcano. So let's close this out. You can feel it? Oh, I know you can. Not anger exactly, more like fatigue. Mental static. Finishes a sentence, that low-grade exhaustion that comes from knowing every topic is already loaded before anyone. It's why conversations feel shorter but heavier. Why disagreement doesn't feel curious anymore. It feels final. Why everything arrives pre-sorted, prejudged, pre-punished. Somewhere along the way, ideas stopped being tools. They became uniforms. And once that happens, facts don't land as information. They land as threats. You saw it tonight in different ways. Moments where names mattered more than nuance, where language did the work. Thinking used to. Where belief hardened into identity. And identity fused to bend. And when alliance replaces judgment, something quiet gets lost. Human scale, the ability to hold a thought without recruiting it, the space to be wrong without being branded. That's when outrage feels easier than understanding. Labels feel safer than listening, and certainty feels more comfortable than responsibility. But here's the part that doesn't get said enough. This isn't about bad people, it's about what happens when thinking gets outsourced to teams. When every reaction is rehearsed, when every pause is treated like betrayal. Because once everything becomes ideological, nothing is allowed to stay human. Not mistakes, not motives, not each other. This is a quiet alternative, though. Not a solution, not a program, just release. Not permission to pause, to let a moment exist without performing it, to ask a question without defending a flag. Think before deciding what you're supposed to think. That's not disengagement, that's clarity. Before everyone's arguing and almost no one is thinking. Awareness doesn't fix the world, but it does loosen the grip. And sometimes that's where freedom starts. I'm Robert Peel, and you've been watching The Turn. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anybody who's got the same insane ideologies or thoughts or anything that we call insane nowadays that exists. Because we'll be here every Wednesday, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching The Turn.